Welcome to Empowered Mind, Body, Soul. I'm your host, Olivia Paige with Ascension Healing Sounds. And today I'm joined by special guest, Christina Lavers, and she is a hypnotherapist who works in the quantum field. Empowered Mind, Body, Soul. A podcast journey to your truth with heartfelt stories, sound healing, and life hacks. Hello, Christina. Thank you for being here.
Hi, Olivia. Happy to be here today. It's cold here in Australia. I'm glad to hear it's nice and warm there.
It is warm in the United States. It's our summer months. So you're a hypnotherapist that works in the quantum field. How did you get into hypnotherapy?
Okay, so a long story, but I'll try to put it into a nutshell. So I had a massive awakening back in the early 90s where I was catapulted outside of normal reality. And what I was shown at that stage was just so far beyond the small, limited perspective that we usually have as humans. And so, with that knowledge, that's a whole story in itself that I've written about in a book called Jump into the Blue. But I guess I had to tie that back because that was that's what gave me the background kind of knowledge that after that experience, I went on searching, working on myself, understanding my own unconscious. And through that process led me to develop quite a deep relationship with my unconscious, because one of the things that I really saw clearly during that time was how incredibly beautiful and powerful we each are at our essence, and how naturally, when that is allowed to shine out, every single person on this planet is literally a divine being. But unfortunately, reality here can be quite challenging, quite harsh for most of us. That's a lot of why we come here, is to have these pressures that push us beyond our limits, that push us further than we need to go. We often, as humans, we have things that we're not comfortable with, that we don't want to look at. And those things tend to be pushed down and they become our shadows. And I saw how our shadows distort that divine essence. And so for me, that was really important to realize, oh, okay, so if we can go down and we can actually work on a subconscious level, we can start connecting with these parts of ourselves that we pushed away. And so I guess that was the first thing that brought me to that curiosity about hypnotherapy and how it can be used. And I actually initially, before I studied hypnotherapy, I did the BQH, which is Beyond Quantum Healing. And through working at that level and seeing the way that we can actually tap in, like understanding, and this is where I will go into a little bit of explanation about the quantum field. So the quantum field is basically where everything is happening at once. So there is no time in terms of past, present, future. It's the quantum realm. It's all happening. It's all there. And in terms of the work that I do, how that relates to it is that when we can go in, when we understand that that there's parts of us that are always existing. So a part of us that may have been wounded in the past is continually circling in that energy. And say, for example, as a child, we were very alone. We didn't have support. We felt really isolated. We can go in as adults and actually befriend that child part of us. And whereas in this reality of this time realm where we have past, present, future, that's gone and non-existent. But when we understand the quantum perspective, we know that it's not. And so by going in and healing that child part, and using the example I use, friending, becoming the confidant or the support that we didn't have as a child, when we can provide that to that part of ourselves that is just spiraling at that level, that healing actually ripples out into the present.
Okay. Am I correct in understanding that the difference between just having a talk therapy session versus a hypnotherapy session is the fact that you're working more within the subconscious mind. Is that correct? Is there more to it than that?
So that's a great question, because the thing about hypnotherapy and the thing about hypnosis in general that people often don't realize is that we're kind of always hypnotized. So we're always moving between states of hypnosis. And for example, when we're driving, we can go into that routine, sort of like rote state where we're just in on automatum, and we get there and we go, oh, wow, how did I even get here? I didn't realize. And so the same thing in talk therapy, we can actually reach, state. So it really depends. And sometimes we will access the unconscious in those sessions. But yes, hypnotherapy, I guess, is a more direct way, or can be used in that way, to more directly access aspects that normally are quite difficult to access consciously. Do you want me to give a little example maybe of
Oh,
sort of
yeah,
what
that
that
would be
would?
great. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, just to give a picture of what that would look like. Just as an example, let's say, so one of the things I guess I've got to bring in is I see that we have aspects of ourselves. And so there's not just like there's just me, Christina, and you, Olivia, but I'm sure you understand the concept of saying, oh, part of me wants to do this and part of me wants to do that. And we might have a part that loves to party and stay up late, and another part that doesn't even want to go out, and another part that, and it just depends which part's going to win in the moment. And when we start becoming aware of the different aspects of us, so one of the ways that I work is, let's just say, for example, I'm just thinking of someone that had an issue with smoking. Often I don't work directly with this kind of thing, but it's just a nice example for it. So they wanted to quit smoking. So the way I would work in this situation is I bring the person down and I invite all the parts of self to come in and to communicate why they are either for or against quitting smoking. And so it's quite interesting, because often what happens is that we have these parts that want to quit smoking, that are really keen, just keeping on with this example. Yes, I want to quit. I don't want to do it anymore. These are the parts that bring us to therapy. But then we have these parts in the background, the minute we walk out of the session, are going, come on, have I? And
Right.
what I like to do is to actually speak with those parts and find out what, because it's important to come from a place of understanding that all the parts really have our best intentions, but some of them are so disconnected, so cut off, these shadow parts from the heart, that they're not in line with what the surface parts of us want. And so when we can go in and find out what they need to be able to align with us, with what we want to create, then our energy can move forward much more easily, because otherwise they'll be working in the background to self-sabotage, to do whatever makes it not happen. So in this example with the woman quitting smoking, there was a part that was like, my thing is I am responsible for keeping the system from feeling from overwhelm. And cigarettes are a really important tool. And so I don't want to give them up. For me, that's a thing. I know that when things get intense, it's boom, I can just pop the idea of a cigarette in mind and we can go and chill out and get a bit calm. And there was another part, I'll just say a little bit of the parts in this because it's just interesting, I think. So there was another part that was a real rebel. And the rebel was like, this is my FU to society. Every time I have one, it's a bit like, I don't care and I'm not going to be the good girl or whatever. And so that part is, I don't want to be all the prissy, blah, blah, blah. It's about coming back and speaking to those parts and finding out what they need. For example, with the part that was the part that used cigarettes for the overwhelm, that part needed something to calm. And she actually got a cat. And the cat worked really well. So just patting the cat, connecting with the cat worked quite well in terms of a replacement. But if that hadn't been put in place, she would have found it a lot more difficult to quit. And the same thing with the other part, the part that was the rebel. And this is an interesting thing, is often these shadow parts of us are so disconnected that they're just spiraling in their own little, what I call shadow bundles. And it's little pieces of reality that they got pushed away with. So it's like little beliefs that they believe, all usually they're distorted, not real beliefs, and they need to be updated. For example, this part that is a bit of a rebel has come to believe that this is going to be her way of sort of standing strong. But when that part can be shown that it doesn't help her to stand strong and to keep her independence, it actually makes her more dependent and dependent on these big corporations, and is bringing down her ability to be able to be truly free. And so it's about explaining to those parts like a perspective that they might not be seeing from their little shadow bundle perspective. And as they expand their perspective, they then are able to go, okay, yeah, maybe I will try this. Maybe that does sound better. And finding a way, like, okay, what could be a way that you could still feel a little bit rebellious? So just asking questions, what could replace that? And so it's really about almost ultimately, I guess, in terms of the whole shadow work perspective and the whole way I work, is understanding that there are lots of components to each of us. And some components are working at the fore on the surface at a conscious level, some components in the background unconsciously. And it's about actually creating alignment. It's actually having these parts form a team so that we're moving forward really in a united way towards our goals.
The part that was dealing with the overwhelm, did that part come up with the idea of getting the cat, or was that something she came up with after the session, or how did that come about?
Okay, so that wasn't in the session. So we just said, okay, let's look out for what you need. And then in between sessions, when she came back, she said, I got a cat, and that seems to be really helping. And so then we went in again and we checked in, and she was like, yeah, I'm happy with this. So I am willing to align with this goal now. That isn't going to be such a stressor in terms of what I have to do.
Well, and she had a different outlet for her overwhelm, like petting the cat versus picking up a cigarette.
Yeah. So that was a different one that could work. And then there was a few, she can't have the cat with her at all times. Cigarettes are a lot easier to carry around in your bag. It's also finding, it's similar to what you do at the surface level, finding tools and stuff that help you, but more specifically targeted to parts of you and finding what their specific needs are.
Okay. And so you said that you started in BQH. Are you now a clinical hypnotherapist?
Yeah, so I started with BQH, and it was a territory I was really familiar with. And so I just went in and I did the BQH training and just jumped in, was super comfortable in that. But I felt that I just, after a couple of years of doing it and seeing all the magic and just how incredible it is and what we connect to, I wanted to get more of an idea of the nuts and bolts of the process, because I didn't have that. So that's why I decided to study the hypnotherapy, was to get a little bit more kind of background understanding of what are we doing here. And of course, standard hypnotherapy, it doesn't completely explain from a quantum perspective or even from an energetic perspective what's happening. But it did give me that, I guess, a little bit more understanding of what's the logistics behind the process.
Do you think it was necessary to enhance the BQH sessions that you were doing? Do you think that the clinical hypnotherapy is necessary to be good at that? Or do you think you can do it without?
I think I feel like I was a great BQH practitioner before I did the hypnotherapy training. But for me, the hypnotherapy training allowed me it gave me the confidence to go beyond where we were trained in BQH and just expand into what I've described to you is not a BQH session. So when I was doing that's not how BQH works. So BQH is very much, it's a very organic process. So that's why it's a lot easier. I don't plan somebody's BQH session at all. Whereas if I was working on a hypnotherapy session and somebody came with something very specific they wanted to work with, I might have a little bit more planning in terms of my approach and what I thought would be a good way to approach it. Whereas a BQH session is really a journey where you bring people down into the deep theta states, when that's where the quantum realm is accessible. with the imagination is something that we're taught is for children and it's silly and it's not really real and it's not important. And that's the biggest lie we've been told. Not that's one of them. There's a lot. um, but the imagination really is our way of interfacing with the energetic realm, with the unconscious, with all that isn't that physical matter. That is how we can really, through imagination, is the language of the unconscious. And so when people go into that level, the more that they can just start allowing what comes through, they end up on this really incredible journey. So each one is completely, like, I guess this is what I mean. It's really an organic process. So I never know what that's going to look like. And for every person, it is just so different. Whereas, oh, sorry, did you want to ask something?
Oh, I was just going to ask if the client sets an intention for their session or.
Yeah. So that is the one bit of planning. Before a session, we actually spend a good amount of time getting a lot of clarity around what is the intention. And the intention does act as the anchor point. And so usually the intention can be something like, I want to have more connection with my higher self. I want to connect to my guides, or I want to understand my life purpose. But how your system shows you that can be completely different. And
Okay.
it really seems to depend on the person as well. Some people come in and their session might be very dreamlike. So it's almost like I'm going here and I'm going there. And through that, it's all these insights come through and all this information that they need in terms of their healing. Other people, it can be just like dropping in and remembering I'm on a soul mission and my guides are here. We're on a ship. We're discussing why I came here, what I need to do. Yeah. So I never know what we're going to encounter when we go in for a session. And other people, again, there's some people whose sessions are really abstract, it's like healing colors and this wave of green is coming through me and it's creating this. And yeah, you can't really say this is what it is, because it's coming from that really creative place that we each hold, that sacred divine creative point within each of us. And that point is our own uniqueness and can't be defined or predetermined.
Okay. And so then I think, were you going to say what the difference is? Like you were saying the BQH is more
Yeah.
organic, where a
Yeah.
hypnotherapy session, is that more scripted or?
I wouldn't say scripted. So I wouldn't say scripted at
Okay.
all. I would say
Okay.
more targeted. Whereas
Okay.
a BQH session, most people who come for a BQH session are looking more for just a one-off experience where they want to have something happen. That's where they work their intention around. So it's usually something quite general, like I want to feel more connection with my guides. I want to have more access to my higher self. Like it's a really specific and usually more spiritual focus. Whereas with the hypnotherapy, it could be something like, I'm trying to start this business and I feel like every time I sit down at the computer, my mind just goes blank and something's blocking me. I've got a block. I want to move this block. So it's much more specific, much more targeted in the way that we're working.
Through all the things that you have learned, and when somebody comes to get a session from you, how is your session different than other people's? Because I know you mentioned you feel like you do things just a little bit different. So can you explain that a little bit?
Yeah. Okay. With a BQH, so with that one, I don't know if that one would be necessarily that different. So I've altered, I guess, if you went through the script that I use to bring people into hypnosis, that one I've changed. So that induction has changed probably quite a bit from the one I started with, but it's still basically the same. And then, like I
Okay.
said, the journey's just open. So in that way, it wouldn't be that different. I guess everybody has their own style, their own how they hold space for a person, because that's my job in a BQH session is really stepping back, holding space, allowing the process, but also asking questions, saying, where would you like to go from here? They say, oh, I'm in a field and I'm looking down, I can see a village in the distance and there's a forest. And I might say, okay, and where would you like to go? And they'll say, oh, I want to head to the village. So I'm just more there asking questions, or did you want to go back, or did you want to stay and enjoy this scene, or do you feel like you'd like to move on? And that sort of thing. And I think in that way, that would be quite similar in terms of how other people work. But with traditional hypnotherapy, I guess the way I work is really, I like to get down to the real root of it. And hypnotherapy is such a broad area, and there's so many ways to work. And I guess there's a lot of issues I have in terms of the way hypnotherapy is perceived. Most hypnotherapists have trouble with that because of that mainstream perception that comes through media with silly cartoons about people getting hypnotized and that sort of thing. And obviously I think any hypnotherapist, I don't think very many hold clocks in front of you anymore. So that's gone. But the idea of bringing the parts work in, there are definitely hypnotherapists that use that. So there's something called resource therapy. That is a modality that is specifically a hypnotherapy modality that does work with parts and connecting parts. I have a lot of understanding as well from IFS, which is Internal Family Systems, which isn't a hypnotherapy modality. And so I bring in elements of IFS into the way that I work, but not strictly. And that's what my book is about, is through my own exploration, I've found my own system, or almost language, if you will, that I was explaining a bit before, like shadow bundles, and that comes from my own personal exploration. So that will come into it as well. When I'm working with somebody from a hypnotherapy perspective, I always say, just toss out, if you've done hypnotherapy in the past, toss that out, because that's not how we're working. And I know that sometimes, and not all the time at all, but sometimes hypnotherapy can be used as a Band-Aid. And sometimes that's what people are looking for. Say, for example, I want to write this book, but every time I sit down at the computer, I can't work. So you could just push down, like a hypnotherapist could box in the part of us that is causing the problem, so that we do have this smooth ability to write, say, for a while. This is just an example. But to me, that's just creating more long-term problems. And I guess I see it as that the part of us that gets locked away is going to just drop down deeper and be more adamant in trying to work against us. And it might not come out in terms of, so that way that it used to do it by blocking us at the computer, it might be completely different. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that does make sense.
So you have mentioned the shadow self a few times since we've been chatting, and I know you've written a book. Can you tell us what your book is called and a little bit about your book?
Absolutely. The book is called Retrieving Shadows, A Return to the Heart, and it's a shadow work handbook. And the way that it came into being was that it started with a lot of people asking me. I was getting a lot of messages from people just going, what is shadow work? And it was happening so often that I thought it would be great to just put something together to just explain. Just a nice little package that if someone asked me that question, I could just send a PDF off to them. And so I did that. I created that several years ago. And I can remember showing it to a few people who know me really well. And they read it and they're like, it's all right, but it's not up to your usual standard. And I thought, oh, it's fine. This is just something that I just want to put out. And anyway, I did that. And then just over a year ago, I went to revisit it and I started reading it. And I was like, I could do this so much better if I really put the time and effort. And I think it's worth it. I think this is such an important thing. And the feeling just started growing in me and to really work on it, and the excitement. And that's something that I've really learned to follow. That feels like when I'm doing something that I'm meant to be doing. And so I started working on this manuscript, or originally it was really just a file, and it was getting bigger and bigger. And it would be one of these things that I guess, started feeling a bit bigger than me. Like it started feeling, wow, this almost has a will of its own, and I am just here to serve it. What do I need to do to bring it to life, to bring it to birth it into the world? And so it's been an honor to feel like I have that role because it is something that's the thing is that I feel that we each, as I mentioned before, we each have that internal light. And that internal light is imbued with our own unique gifts and talents and things that we understand. And the beautiful part is that each one of us has this kind of piece of the puzzle that I believe we need to bring out. And I feel that's the time that we're stepping into. Like we've come from a time where it was all about individual, but in a way that was all very separate and disconnected and keeping secrets and wearing masks and pretend being who we felt that we should be, hiding who we actually were. And I feel like now the energies are really coming into a place of it's time to be real. And so for me, it was like, this was my little piece of the puzzle. This is what my kind of assignment was to bring this book into being. We help the collective in terms of understanding our inner worlds. And I wanted to do it in a way, and I guess this was a big part of my aim, where it was really like, because our inner worlds are so complex, like they literally are, each one is a unique, moving fluid multiplex of what each of us are. And I wanted to be able to bring light to the areas of darkness within in a way that was really simple and anyone could grasp. And as much as I might go off when I'm talking into blah, 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 at least in a book, I can hone that back. And I feel like I've done a really good job of doing it in a way that really anyone could sit down. I think even a teenager could just probably read this and understand it. That's my hope.
And why is the shadow self so important to understand or get to know?
The reason that I believe it's so important is it's literally what gets in our way. And it's what distorts that divine energy that emanates from us. A bit like if we had that light, and then you could imagine that we are a lens, and if our lens has lots of spots on it, what we project out into the world is going to have lots of distortion. So the more that we can actually clean that lens by recognizing, consciously connecting with our shadow parts, it's not about pushing them away. It's about loving them back. So it's about finding them, because every part of us, and I believe this is at a collective level as well as an individual level, every part of us, when it's loved and feels safe and valued, is actually like a force for good, I believe. And so when we find these shadow parts that are acting not in our best interest because they've been rejected. When something's been rejected, it's usually angry, working against us, it feels unseen. So it's really about finding all the parts, and that's why it's called Return to the Heart, and reconnecting and finding what their true purpose within our own system is. So when we get these shadow parts have been hidden away, working against us, and we actually see them, try to understand them, we discover that they actually have a gift to bring to us. And when we can see them as they really are, rather than how we were taught to see them, we find that power. And I think that's one angle that I'd like to bring up too, because our society is very much, you don't want to be different. Everybody, especially as kids, are trying to fit in or trying to be like everybody else. And we all have unique magical qualities that are completely different. They are those very things that make us stand out. And so those tend to be some of the first things that we push down, sadly, just to fit in, because they're not really understood. We might do whatever it is. We might have something that other kids at school go, well, that's weird, But if we actually
We
took
don't
the
feel like it's
time,
good enough.
yeah. Oh, the good enough is that's a whole, the worth is huge in this actually. And that's what I feel is a key component, is that I believe that at our hearts, we cannot be bad or wrong. Like that divine energy really is divine. But when we're children and we are told by people like that's bad or that's ugly or that's not nice, we make a mistake and we actually we connect a piece of us to that statement rather than seeing our action is wrong or, our behavior could have been improved on or what we did, we see it as a piece of us. And that brings up so much shame. And we're not taught really well at all as children how to deal with those moments when we get overwhelmed with feelings of self-shame. And so our default generally is push it down, keep the surface functioning, and just get that feeling away. But then there's actually a piece of us that identifies with that. For example, if someone said, oh, you're too loud, you're always like trying to show off or something like that, there's a piece of us that we went, oh, that's not good. And we tuck that part away. And if we could actually rebuild a relationship with that part, we'd actually find that what was called a show off or was something framed negatively in our past, we might find the positive expression of that, which is a performer or somebody who speaks really well in groups or whatever it is. There's always going to be the two sides. And when we can reclaim those pieces that we labeled as darkness and bad, we actually will find the gift that it holds.
Okay. And so is that kind of like a big part of the work you do in sessions with people is really nurturing that shadow self, maybe acknowledging and nurturing it?
Absolutely. So a lot of our shadow parts are actually child parts. And a lot of times, like in sessions, people will connect with a child part. I'll just give an example. So this one woman do you think we have time for me to give? I'll just give this session because it's quite a nice little picture of a BQH session as well that it will illustrate it.
Sure.
Okay, so in this session, this woman started off the session in kind of this cowboy town. And she was going, I don't want to be here. I don't have anything I connect to here. I don't know why I'm here. And so I said, okay, that's fine. You can choose look around. If there's really nowhere that you feel to explore, that you feel drawn to, we can just wipe the scene and move on. And she said, yeah, I think that feels right. So I said, okay. So we cleared the scene. And then she said, oh, that's really strange because there's actually this horse here with me that followed me from this town that I was in. And so we were both laughing and I said, well, you can ask the horse why it stayed with you. And so she did. And the horse's answer was comfort. And I said, that's nice. Are you okay? And she goes, I don't really feel like I need comfort. I'm fine. And I said, okay, are you okay with the horse being there? And she's like, I guess so. And so she went through her whole journey and the horse would just be there in the background the whole way through. And we didn't really know why until we got to the end. And at the end, she connected with this child part. And this child part was so wounded that it was like, I don't want to talk to you. I don't want anything to do with you. I know that I'm bad and I'm wrong and I'm more bad and wrong than anyone else on the planet. And none of your grown-up speak can convince me otherwise. And it's very much often, especially with the parts that have been really disconnected, really pushed away, they feel so rejected, so unloved that it takes really a lot of patience and time to build that trust again and to bring that part back into the fold in a sense. So one of the things at that time that I said, is there anything we can do for you? Any way we could help you? She said I think it was at that point, she said, I want the horse. It was like this moment of, that's why the horse is here. So the horse, and it had come as comfort. So that horse, and it's so brilliant. This is why I love this story, is it just shows like how the magic can be woven into from these higher levels, because not only is the horse there, it came along to actually comfort this child part and stay with the child part in the sort of what I'm calling the quantum field. It's also like a Trojan horse for the light. So this child is in a place where it doesn't want anything. It's so convinced that nothing's going to love it. The person who is at the heart that it should be directly connected to, it's not willing to, but it will take the horse. So that's a first step in rebuilding that connection. And I just think, yeah, that's such a nice example of how we can work with those children parts. That was a particularly stuck one. They're not always so stuck. But it's not uncommon for the child parts to be stuck like that. I was just going to say, one of the things that's also a bit unique about how I work is that one of the things that I came to realize was that when people did connect with an aspect of their inner child in a session, there was often this sense of tears and really feeling connected and seeing how lonely and sad that child part was. And really the love is legitimate and really there. But what happens is that the session ends, they get back and busy with life, and they forget about that child again. It just falls back into the blackness of oblivion. And those child parts are like, you know what? I knew it. She doesn't care. She's just off doing her adult stuff and she doesn't care about me. I knew it. That's why it can be really important to maintain the connection even after the session. So I always recommend to people when they have a session and they have a strong connection with the child that they will then for 30 days set an alarm every day and just take 5 minutes. Just 5 minutes. Obviously could be longer, but just at least 5 minutes. That's easy to fit into a day of just connecting. And I recommend having something to symbolize the child part. Like it could be a crystal or just anything, a little figurine, anything that feels right, that feels, yeah, this would be a nice thing to represent that child, and just sitting with it on our hearts and just getting familiar with the feeling. And the more that we can get familiar with that feeling that we associate with that child part, the easier it becomes to actually know when they need us. So that's a really interesting thing, because I know for myself, so this is going back to that time when I had that big, massive awakening, my guide showed me my inner child. And I realized when I met her that she was saying to me, you never listen to me. I'm always trying to send you these messages and you just ignore them. And I knew immediately when she said that, oh, those messages are those bad feelings I get. And I just push them away and try to get busy with other things. And so now when somebody meets that child part, I try to encourage them to get really familiar so that they recognize those messages. So they don't just see it as this annoying, bad feeling or uncomfortable thought. They can go, oh, that's my child part and it needs a little bit of love right now. 30 days is what they say, about 3 weeks to a month to create new brain pathways in the brain. And in doing that for that amount of time, we're actually building that connection in a way that we don't have to have an alarm anymore, because it just becomes part of our natural flow where we can then recognize. So we might say, walk into, I don't know, a situation, a party, and say, for example, we get this little feeling of, oh, I'm really scared. This is uncomfortable, rather than push it down, which could then cause anxiety. We actually just take a few minutes to say, I'm here, that's okay, we'll be right, we can go when we want to, and just help that part feel a little bit softer, a little bit safer, a little bit more heard. And then we might find that we can be in the situation with much less anxiety underlying the actual situation, if that makes sense.
Okay. And I don't know if this answers the question, but I was going to ask, if someone has a session and they meet one of these parts of themselves, these child parts of themselves, do they ever have to have another session to work with this child part to work on a different layer, or to revisit the same, I don't know, feeling or experience in order to heal it on a different or a deeper level? Does that make sense?
It absolutely makes sense. Great question. And I think the thing is that we never actually need anyone else in our process in a way. So that's why I wrote the book, is I wanted to write it so in a way it's like a DIY of this. But that being said, it's absolutely, sometimes it can be invaluable. And sometimes we do reach places where we need to. That's the nature of being human, is that reaching out for that wider connection. And sometimes we do need a helping hand. So I would say that no, there's nothing that you have to do. I would never say, oh, somebody's going to come to a session, it's going to be clearly they're going to need 5 sessions to make this happen. It doesn't work like that. So some person might come in, do a session and be like, that's great. That showed me what I need to see. I can work with this, and I might never see them again. Or they might come in and be like, that's great. I'm loving working with you. This is really working for me. It's helping me move along really quickly. I want to do sessions every week. So it really depends. And then that's why I wrote the book as well, because I know that for me as a collective, I just want to see us rise. I want to see us come together, and I want to make it basically the information that I have as accessible as possible. By putting it into a book, anyone can just take that and start doing it on their own, start doing that inner work, getting to know themselves, bringing that inner alignment and light internally.
The book sounds really amazing. So where can people find the book? Is it launched?
Okay.
Has it been published yet, or?
As of right now, the paperback is available all over on Amazon. The ebook is available for pre-order. And right now, I don't know when this will come out, but right now it's $2.99. So leading up to it will go up after the launch. So I'm actually having an in-person launch this Sunday. So that's for local people here. And on Tuesday, the audiobook, ebook, and print will all be available from that point on. And that's through Amazon. I am in the process of uploading it to Ingram Spark, which they distribute to all the bookstores. And that way you could walk into pretty much any bookstore and just order it. They won't have it in the shop, but they'll be able to order it in. But I am having a few hiccups with that at the moment that are super frustrating. But so that might be a little bit longer, but yeah, it will all be available certainly on Amazon in next week. It's super exciting.
Oh, that's so exciting. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's awesome. If somebody wanted to book a session with you, where would they have to go? Do you have a website or Facebook or anything like that?
I do. So people can contact me. Most people contact me through the contact section page on my website, which is quantumflowhypnosis.com, and also on Facebook. So I have a Facebook page that is mainly what I operate on, is just my name, Christina Lavers. I do also have a business page as well, but honestly, I don't use it a lot. I think I just publish there, and sometimes I use it for advertisement, but I don't. Generally just go with the Christina Lavers is where I'm most active. And my website is, probably the best way. That just reaches out straight through my email, and I get back as soon as I can.
Okay. All of those links will be in the show notes, including the link for your book. And it was so wonderful to have you on the show, Christina. I appreciate you being here. So thank you so much for sharing all of your wisdom on hypnotherapy and the shadow self. And I just loved the idea of having to nurture the shadow self and the importance of nurturing your shadow self and connecting with it and acknowledging it to help you find your true authentic self. I really appreciated that perspective. So thank you for being here.
No, thank you so much for doing this, Olivia. You're wonderful, and wishing you all the best into the future.
All right. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining me in today's episode. Be sure to check the show notes for guest links and other helpful information. I'm your host, Olivia Paige, and you can find me on all the social media platforms at Ascension Healing Sounds.